Hey, I'm Rob Jones, and I'm going to show you how you can make sick dubstep bass sounds using only the instruments and effects that come with Ableton Live. A lot of people think you need external plugins to make really filthy sounds. But the truth is, if you know how to work your DAW, you can make all the sounds right there with the devices they provide. The break I'm going to show you has only two instruments in it, operator and a drum rack. And yet it sounds like this. You may be surprised to know that not much filtering's going on in that break. Most people think that in order to bring the top end in and out in that rhythmic fashion that's become famous in bass-heavy genres, you need filters, when a lot of it can actually be done with clever synthesizing techniques and oscillator routing. Operator, for example, is an amazing synth, with a total of 4 oscillators, all of which can be made to modulate one another if required. I'm keeping it in the default setting, which means that the oscillators are chained together in such a way that makes oscillators B, C and D modulate oscillator A. This process of intense frequency modulation creates a lot of extra harmonics and gives a sound way more character. First thing I'm going to do then is to choose a nice rich waveform for oscillator A, which is the only one sounding here. I'll go for a square wave with the full range of harmonics, so it's nice and dirty already. Now listen to the sound you get when I turn up oscillator B, so it's modulating oscillator A. Pretty fat already. Now check out what happens when I bring in the other oscillators, so they're adding additional modulation on top. What I'm going to do now is automate oscillator B's level using the envelope section in the clip editor, which will bring the combined modulation of all the oscillators in and out. As this was the last control I adjusted, it'll show up straight away when I click on the E switch in the editor, so I can immediately draw a curve into the grid for my clip here, which is simply a sustained note of C1. You can either draw the curve by creating breakpoints and dragging them, or by switching to the pencil tool and setting a level for steps on the grid, which you can make smaller or larger as you like. I'm going to turn on the metronome for now so I can hear where the beats are. And I can do the same for the other oscillator levels if I want to, in order to create different rhythmic textures and tonal qualities for my bassline, or automate their pitch controls. Check out the sound when I draw in a curve for oscillator C's coarse pitch dial now. After tarting around for a while, I made this 4-bar clip, which plays a sequence of MIDI notes with a little pitch slide in the middle, and has automation of a few of the oscillator's controls. I only really automated the coarse pitch dials, which keeps the frequency modulation relatively sane. Adjusting the fine pitch dial leads to an overly distorted sound, as too many dissonant harmonics are added. I did draw one curve for the fine dial of oscillator D at the end of the phrase though, and you can see it has a much smaller change in values, as this is all you need to get a drastic effect. One thing that I like to do sometimes is to change the oscillator configuration during a clip, which is a global setting on operator that can be manually switched using the mouse or automated in the arrangement. But I thought of a nice way of allowing yourself to switch to a particular arrangement, and that's using an instrument rack. So I dragged operator into a new rack and then pasted it onto 3 separate chains, with each operator having a different oscillator configuration selected. Then I just mapped the mute switches for the chains to the first 3 macro controls in the rack, allowing me to create 3 clips for the bassline on the MIDI track, which are all identical apart from they automate the macro dials in slightly different ways, with each one unmuting either chain 1, 2 or 3. The only other thing I needed to do was set up the clip's launch boxes so that they function in legato mode, which allows me to switch from one to the next without restarting the clip. Then When I launch each of the clips, which I'm doing with keys on my computer keyboard, you can hear how I can freely switch from one operator to the next with as slow or faster pattern as I like. I'm going to scrap the whole switching thing for now though, as I've decided to use all 3 instances of operator in the rack at the same time, but have adjusted the levels of the chains to set the balance the way I want. Now I want to do some effects processing. You'll have heard a lot of people say you need to use external distortion plugins for this, but you can do it yourself in Live. What I've got is 3 bass return channels, with each one filtered a certain way using 1 or 2 auto filters. So one channel is just the bass frequencies, one is the middle, and one just the top end. Doing it this way means I can apply effects to certain frequencies in the bass sound rather than the whole lot. For example, I'm using Redux to apply some serious bit crushing to the bottom end. Notice the filter is added after the effect, as Redux can add a lot of high frequencies. Then, on the middle channel, there's slightly less bit crushing going on, and on the top end, I'm using Saturator to apply some wave shaping, and there's also a chorus. Here's where it gets even more interesting though. I've stuck a sidechain compressor onto each return track, as I'm using a different drum to compress each track, according to its main frequencies. So I've got the very bottom end being compressed by the kick, and the middle return by the snare, and so on. You can hear these returns not only make the bass sound way better, giving you full control over the bass, mids, and highs, but also the sidechain compressors make sure the drums really punch through the mix. Now let's check out some filtering. I'm going to show you how to create some wicked vocal filtering, like the sound that Daft Punk made really popular, and you hear on a lot of dubstep basslines today. Live actually has vocal presets for its EQ, which are a particular formant or filter curve that mimics the shape of a mouth. So you can load these up to make a track produce a particular vowel sound. All I've done is to map the mod wheel on my keyboard to the frequency of each of the 4 bands here. And then, in the MIDI mapping section, set a particular frequency range for each band, so that the formant keeps its approximate shape, but gets transposed up and down, as you can see when I move the mod wheel now. So I'm going to hit record and draw in some automation for the EQ. So that's given you a taster of some of the things you can do in Live then, and hopefully made you realise the full potential of the software once you know how to use it. Apologies if some of the techniques were a bit rushed and difficult to follow, but you can find out all these things and much more explained fully in our Producer Tech online courses for Live, Logic and Reason by following the links at the end of this movie. And there's also a coupon code for getting 20% off. Bye for now.